You can see part of the picture. That was supposed to be the, that's supposed to be a big basket. I showed you a picture of the basket from the time, but baskets don't last very long.
Snake, is it? We used to put a snake in our basket.
Oh, that was really cool, yeah. The best thing ever is you put a snake in a basket and you tie a thing to it, so when the grandkids open it or kids open, yeah. Okay, so he fed the 5,000. We saw there was huge implications in that. Okay, so just a slight review, but the implications were, I think, very important because he uses a terminology that is Greek, very Greek. He tells the guys to lay down, to go recumbent is what you do to eat. So he's already set up the crowd, and the disciples are like, they're chewing their fingernails. Can he provide? Because he just told them to lay down. But then the next thing is that in the Greek worldview, that's a symposium. So when they have food, and there's more going on there because there's obviously teaching, and he does the follow-up. The follow-up is he tells the disciples to go get the leftovers of the food. And here, I got to do that last verse. I think the last verse is right here. Accordingly, they led together and filled entirely 2 and 10 large baskets of pieces from out of the 5 loaves consisting of barley, which were no, it's the one before that. Let's see, the one before that is about this. Oh, yeah. This one. Yeah. But how they were filled in, he makes a logical argument to his disciples. You lead together the having superabounded pieces, the leftover pieces, in order that anything may not be destroyed fully. That is a beautiful. He's obviously not talking about pieces of food, right? It's a double. It has double meaning. Most specifically calls it double entendre. It's a multiple entendre. He's talking about multiple things and ideas, and it's not just about the pieces of food. It's about the people, because why would you say destroyed fully, right? You're eating it. It's food. So it's not a matter of the stuff, it's a matter of the people. And so someone made the comment, and someone made a really good comment about, having business meetings where, you go back and you review the material that you've spoken about to make sure that people understand. So you put them in their groups, right? You give your talk, you put the people in their groups, and then what do? You go back through and you make sure that they understood the concepts, right? Anyway, I think it's okay. What someone should write a book about, management theory by Jesus or something. Anyway, so this is what happened after that. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is coming to the world." Now, the Greek is more important to us, right? Here's the Greek. Here's King James. And those men which had seen the miracle. Then those men who had seen the miracle that Jesus did said, "This is of a truth the prophet that should come into the world." Okay, that's interesting. According to certainly, man-faced humans, Adontes, having stared at, who, which, what he had made or done, Simeon, the supernatural ceremonial indication, the sign, Eleazar, they were making a logical argument. They were talking to each other, which is what he wanted them to do, right? But not about this. That because it is not false. The prophet, the foreteller, he is coming or going to or into the cosmos, that which was created. Kind of different meaning, right? Here we go. Let's see. Accordingly, the men having stared at what he had done, a supernatural ceremonial indication, were making a logical argument that he is not false foreteller who is coming into that which was created. This is really kind of different than the NIV and the King James, right? I mean, it's the same thing, same basic idea, but the whole point is kind of different here because look at this. I mean, the word they use is is world, right? Both the NIV and the King James use world. And they use miracle, they use sign. The truth, that prophet. But the really important thing is, there's a word in Greek for world, or land or earth or whatever. It's gay. But they didn't use that word. They use the word cosmon, which is a whole lot more. Look, the writers, the readers, the hearers, the words are used intentionally. They're not just, what do you call it? The Greek doesn't have that many words in the first place. And so when I pick the words I'm using them for a reason. I think it's interesting that our Bibles or our translations like to say world. But the world is certainly different than that which was created, the cosmos, the cosmon, right? Cosmos, period.
That means he had to have come from outside of all that was created and only God is there.
Bingo. Well, automatically what it does, it applies something in philosophy and theology that seems to be beyond the average student today, and even the average adult doesn't comprehend, like for example, C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis goes and makes this comment about miracles versus magic, right? Magic comes within the fabric of the world, the creation. Miracles come from without the fabric. And therefore, he would be slapping, like, for example, Harry Potter, the author of Harry Potter, because he would say the minute you bring up magic and miracles, you have brought up God. That's what he says. He says it's amazing that people read these, you read about vampires. A vampire, if you didn't know, Bram Stoker was a very strong Catholic. The reason he wrote Dracula, you know why he wrote Dracula? He wrote Dracula to prove in the Victorian era God. Because Dracula, as C.S. Lewis says, the minute I bring up a supernatural creature that's affected by crosses, that's affected by prayer, that's affected by prayer, by the way, everything the SAS, the Scholastic, whatever, readers, everything they pull out of Dracula, they always do, they expurgate Dracula, they pull out all the prayers and the prayer stuff. Even though it really functionally hurts the writing, which is funny because they want to get rid of Roald Dahl stuff too. But anyway, the thing that's, and Dr. Seuss, right? But the thing that's amazing about Dracula is the minute I bring up a Dracula, I am proving God. And that's what C.S. Lewis meant. Because the minute you bring up a supernatural creature affected by crosses, the church, and whatever, I've immediately said there is God. Because otherwise, how could a cross or a church or holy water affect a creature if there was not a supernatural basis and God didn't exist, right? I mean, the Victorians understood this. We read Dracula and go, oh, this is a cool horror story. No, it proves God. This is a lack of significant awareness that we seem to have in literature, which really kind of bothers me a little bit. But anyway, the difference between using the word day and the word using cosmos is enormous. And we see that in the Greek, right, the word usage is important. For example, they weren't just talking about it. They were making a logical argument. And only that, he uses the identity form, is, a direct identity form, so that he is the not false foreteller, who is coming into that which was created, which is interesting too, who is coming into that which is created. In other words, they see Jesus, these people are more aware than we are, because they see Jesus as coming from outside of the creation, which means they're already saying that he is God. I mean, I think this is really important. I noted this too, I've already known this, but I think it's really important to note. In history, the gods don't bestow food on the people, ever. There are no stories in myths or history where the gods give the people food. period. The people give God's food. There are no myths in the ancient world until God made manna and quail, and Jesus fed the multitudes. And no Greek gods healed either. Asclepius, the Asclepius dude, Asclepius was a human who was made into a god because he healed, not illness, but injuries and blemishes. And we would say, who cares about injuries and blemishes? What illness is a curse? Illness is a curse. What is a blemish? We even still, like, for example, if a person has a birthmark, we even call them things like angel kisses. Guess what they were called before they were angels? Well, they were always angels, but guess what they were called before Christianity? They're called curses. If you read the second mission, Socrates, and we know this historically, that many times slaves that had blemishes like birthmarks were killed, just killed. And the fact that Socrates, in my book, I allowed them to have a person who was a slave who had a birthmark on their face. And guess what they did? Every piece of money that person got, they took a mold of their face, of their blemish, to the temple of Asclepius, because Asclepius was supposed to have cured injuries and blemishes. And remember I told you, the ancient world, when your kid was sick, if you had a sick person, where did you take them? The temple of Asclepius. Nobody fed them, no one kept them warm, but they might get better. Might. Christianity turned the temples of Asclepius into hospitals. That was the first hospitals, and that's where they worshiped. And by the way, Paul says, right, talks about body parts and things, because he was talking about where the Christians were worshiping in the temples of Asclepius, near the marketplaces, where there were all these plaster casts of the people's injuries. And by the way, in those places where they worshiped or met, why were they able to meet there? Because nobody went there except the sick and the dying. So guess what? The Christians came in and said, hey, here's a blanket, here's some clothes, here's a bowl of soup. You think a bowl of soup is going to help a person with a cold and flu and whatever, right? A lot better than just dying, because nobody else took care of it. Anyway, these are huge and important points that we usually don't understand, right? Basic historical stuff. It's too bad we don't study Greek and Latin anymore, because we'd learn all this stuff in basics. But, this is the way it is. This is the way the world is. Gods do not heal, gods do not feed, but yet Jesus did. And here, Jesus, knowing that they had intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Ooh, here's some interesting stuff. Okay, here we are. Jesus therefore perceived they would come and take him by force to make him a king. He departed again into a mountain himself alone. Jesus accordingly, certainly, he having come to know, that because knows they intended to come or go and to seize him, in order that they might make or do a sovereign, a Celia. He retired anew to or into the mountain, himself remaining. So this in itself is interesting, because if you look what it said, okay, it says taken by force, which is seized, which is pretty good. Accordingly, Jesus, having come to know that they intended to come and seize him in order they might make him a sovereign, he retired anew into the mountain by himself. Which mountain? The one he'd been at previously. Most likely, Jesus feared his own disciples were caught up in the moment with the others. It's not, okay, we would like to think it's just the throng. It's that group of people, right, that he fed. It isn't just the people that he fed. They're all yakking. And disciples are in on it because Jesus left them. Jesus didn't say, hey, guys, we're going up into the mountain and we're going to have a prayer meeting. we're going to have what do you call it? We're going to have what do you call it? A separate, in a business where you go, an offsite, a retreat. We're going to have a retreat. We're going to have an offsite. He didn't say that. He said, he left. He's like, okay, this is getting kind of scary. I'm leaving. You can imagine feeding 5,000 people out in the middle of the wilderness-ish might be a dangerous thing.
Well, up until Jesus died on the cross, they were still expecting a conquering Messiah.
They still are today. Rabboni, what's his name? Not Rabboni of Rabbonis, but what's his name? Rambam. Rambam, 1400s, basically set down the Messiah, and they expect the Messiah to be a conquering Messiah, right? They expect two Messiahs now. In the beginning, they expected one. I think the Maccabees kind of turned them off of that. But we're not fair to the Jewish people because many Jewish people became Christians. And, you know, there are many Messianic Jewish communities. There ought to be a whole lot more. The biggest thing is that a lot of the Jewish community became Christians. And so it's you don't know. You don't know. I mean, if you were from a Greek or Roman background, how do you know there weren't Jewish Christians, Tin Hodos, in your background? No idea, right? I mean, even a DNA checks. Well, don't believe the swab ones. You got to really get some good tissue to check. Anyway, the mountain he had been to before. So now we got this. We're moving into this. Jesus walking on the water. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake. So Jesus left the disciples. Disciples are like, okay. And then when even was now come, his disciples went down to the sea. Okay? Which how? But aposiai, late, it caused to be, Katabasin, they descended, the learners, the disciples of him, on or against the Thalassin, the sea. Not the lake, the sea. I'm not sure why NIV wants to call it a lake. They're Latin, you know, Lake of Tiberias, whatever, but it's considered a sea. It's an inland sea. It's pretty big. Okay, I got a map we'll show that I think later we can see it. But which how it became late, his disciples descended on the sea. Descended on the sea. This is interesting. But that implies that they were in a higher ground, and Jesus went up even higher into the mountain place he had been before. And so apparently this was a place with the 5,000. It's really hard. We tried to figure out where that could be. There's lots of places. It's interesting. We'll see another point made here when it talks about Capernaum and about Tiberias in a little bit. Where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. This in itself is interesting. I mean, either Jesus went off by himself a lot, or I think the disciples were unhappy with themselves. I think the disciples were feeling a little bit tense and guilty, right? Because he gave them a test. I mean, we don't get this because we think all is great in the land. But let's see, did I include some of that? Remember, he had tested, let's see, who he had tested before. He tested, was it Andrew? He asked a couple of disciples, right? Asked one of them to figure out how much money it would cost, or he told them how much it would cost, right? The guy who's obviously good with
Philip.
figures. Was that Philip? Yeah, Philip. And who was the other one? The other one that he said, you know, how are we going to feed all these people, right? And so the disciples, and you know, we get two of them. I suspect he probably was working on all of them. Just saying, you know, the authors aren't wasting time with words. They're giving us the, you know, bits and pieces of the details of the conclusions. And I suspect that, okay, you know, we are used to the American culture. Okay, in American culture, if I ask you a question You're expected to answer that question all by yourself, right? That's the way we do it. But a lot of cultures don't work that way. In a lot of cultures, the expectation is you ask somebody, and what do? They go around the room and say, hey, okay, I'm not good at this math. Could you figure out this math for me and get a number for math? I'm not good at this figuring out. Hey, could you figure this out? You know what I'm saying? What do we call that today? Team building and team. They're trying to build teams. Team building doesn't work very well sometimes in especially American culture, and sometimes it's very detrimental. Anybody who's read The Fountainhead, right? Ayn Rand's book, and see what she thinks about committees and teamwork. She would say it's like trying to make art in a group. You're always going to have something horrible come out, right? She would say art. As a matter of fact, I just read Bill Bryce's book. Bill Bryce is not that funny. He's an American author that's lived in Britain, but he writes about the architecture of Britain and how horrible it is because it was apparently done by committee. And he trashes because he says they took beautiful Victorian buildings, tore them down to put up things that look like toasters and, pieces of concrete that just kind of stick out of the earth. And he was very unpleased by that. But anyway, so we don't know how much was going on, but there is stuff going on. In 17, it says, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum, by now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. So for some reason, maybe Jesus did this a lot. We don't know. It doesn't tell us. We have no idea. We're just getting this. But I think the disciples were not happy with themselves. They entered into a ship. This is better, a ship, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. And Bantes, they having walked on to or into Plon, a sailor. Notice the word. They use the word enter. This says having walked on, and this is an important word, pleon, a sailor. They were coming or going through of the thalassus of the sea to Capernaum, and Scola dimnus ede, even now, and caused to be, and not yet he had come or gone forward to them, to Jesus. Okay? And let's see. Come on, go down to there where I want. And they having walked onto a sailboat, they were going through the sea to Capernaum, and even now dimness it had caused to be, and not yet had Jesus come forward to them. So this is interesting. I think I mentioned this, but in the middle state of the disciples should be amusing. They're among those who wish to make Jesus the sovereign, and then Jesus disappeared. He's gone. They realized they'd done something wrong, and Jesus was likely angry with them, at least exasperated with them. And the other point that's interesting is about the boat. Our impression of the boats, right, is they were bass fishermen, right? They got a little bass boat, a couple of guys in the bass boat, and they're out trolling. No, they got the nets out, right? Yeah, rowing, right. That's not what they had. Here is an archaeological things of a boat, a pleon. These are the kind that they found, in wreckage or whatever around the Sea of Galilee. And this is the kind of boat. Now, we think John and Peter and those guys were poor. Remember, I gave you this whole thing at the beginning. Fishermen who own a Fisher Corporation and have boats, right? This is not these are not the low-class, impoverished. These are people who have some food. These are people who have some work. These are people who have some businesses. And they have these. We don't know how many they have, but the impression we get is that their dad had more than one, right, old Zebedee. And this is a walk-on Peleon, a sailboat. This is the kind of boat they had. They were fishing in. It's not a bass boat. They're not trolling with a bass boat. This is a pretty big boat. And this is the kind of boat that they were using. So, look at your pictures in your kid Bibles, right? And very different than than the reality of the world. It's interesting how what 2,000 years of misunderstanding, a lack of understanding does for us. And plus, we get the English, right? We get the English. You read your English translation. If you're reading your Greek, it's a play on it, and you go, oh, I know what that is. It's a walk-on sailboat. And the only question then is, well, is it a competition sailboat or is it a working boat? You know what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying with a competition sailboat, right? A racing sailboat. You ever seen one? A walk-on racing sailboat. Nobody would say they're little, a start class or whatever that class, snipe class. That's not a walk-on sailboat. That's a sit-in sailboat. Just saying. Yes, sir.
I'm just kind of thinking out behind the scenes here. There's a couple questions that aren't answered by this immediately. It's like, why was the boat there in the first place? They had to arrange for it to be there. Somebody got it there and knew. And then why did they feel it was urgent to leave at that moment without Jesus instead of staying there and camping out on the shore waiting for him to show up to take off wherever they were going?
Well, I'm thinking, like I said, what John does not tell us directly, that the unstated telos, is that Jesus is not the kind of guy that says, well, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home, right? He's, like we've already saw, he is like cool, collected. He gets irritated. I mean, he took a cut of nine tails, right, when he needed to, and he kicked him out, right? So obviously Jesus is kind of a tough guy, I would say. So what John doesn't tell us is how unhappy he was with his disciples. Because remember, at the beginning it says it's Passover, and then it says this is a test, right? This is a test. Not the emergency broadcast system. This is a test of my disciples. Are my disciples, like you guys, he's probably testing them all the time, but he's teaching them. It's a teachable moment, as they say, right? So did they pass the test? No, they basically totally bungled it, right? And so now the crowd, as a matter of fact, you ought to have this question too. Remember, Jesus sent the disciples to do what do they call it? The end of your conference, the end of the conference, the end of the symposium. He sent them out to gather to get the critique papers, right? You always want to get critiques. How was the speakers, right? So he went to get the critiques and find out if the people had learned something. What do you think they were doing? I think they're fomenting revolution. They're saying, hey, this Jesus guy, he's pretty cool, right? What do you think? You think he ought to be our Assailus? You think he ought to be our sovereign? What do you think? Because the disciples were steeped in the messianic, right? I mean, even the woman at the well in Samaria, she was saying we're expecting the Messiah, the Christus, right? And they are too. Now, the woman at the well, I think, was more versed. I love this woman at the well because she didn't pull her sword and say, well, it's time to fight, right? What did she do? She talked to her neighbors and brought them to Jesus. The disciples, on the other hand, what are they ready? They're like, hey, it's time to free the homeland, right? It's time for free Israel. Let's do it.
They didn't have swords, though, but they weren't allowed to have swords.
No, I'm using it as a metaphor. Okay, they're fish knives because we knew they had fish knives, right? And why the Greeks let them have? Probably the Greeks let them have. Why do you think the Greeks let them have their fish knives? Huh?
They could work.
They could do the work of pulling the fish.
I think it wasn't the fish; it's the sailor. Because if you're okay, what do you have a lot of with sailors? You have mast and rigging, right? And mast and rigging require you to be able to cut, right? For example, the sails, you're in a storm in the boat. What do you got to do? Cut the sails down. If you don't, you'll lose the mast. You'll demast the ship. You're done. right? You got to maybe cut cords and make cords and do other things. So to have a fish knife is, we call it a fish knife, so we expect them to be gutting fish. But yeah, it is a good idea to cut fish. It's hard. As a matter of fact, I'll throw this in. This is really an interesting thing. There was a guy who did a study on utensils or tools and meat eating. Like primitive, trying to understand how primitive societies. What is the one thing you can't do if you don't have a knife of some kind, stone knife or something? You can't process meat.
Yeah, you can't chop it up.
You can't process it. It is impossible to process meat without stone tools or tools that allow you to cut into an animal. And the guy did huge studies on different types of cutting utensils or cutting tools to be able to do it. And we know you can make really good cutting tools out of flint and stuff because we've cut ourselves on it. I know you have, all you guys. I don't know if the ladies have. The ladies done it, but every guy here has tried to make stone or boat, stone arrowheads, right? You always want to make arrowheads when you're a kid in Boy Scouts. I don't know if the Girl Scouts have the program where they would and the boys always, would want to make knives, right? But you have to have knives. And about fish, you have to have knives to be able to eat fish. You can't gut them and eat them and fix them or prepare them.
Actually, people do that.
What's that?
They prepare fish different ways that are actually whole. Like at your retirement
It was skinned.
party. Well, I guess that's true. There's
But you could probably once cooked.
You could,
Probably separate.
there are ways. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem is, yes, okay. The guy looked at that and he said, the problem is boiling. You can't boil it. You can broil it.
Yeah, you can grill fish whole and then peel the skin off or head off later.
Yeah. The only problem, there's a couple of problems. And let's just say there was the Great Revolution. Because, yeah, you can put a bear, okay, we killed a bear, we beat it, I don't know, throw it in a fire, burn it, it'll burn the skin off, it'll burn part of the fur off, and eventually you'll get to the meat. And the problem is, though, all you elk hunters and deer hunters know that if you leave the viscera inside what's that? It rots, right?
Yeah.
It gets bad. And so the Great Revolution, he believed it was very interesting. He believed the Great Revolution was when they figured out how to get the viscera out of the killed animals, including fish. There are some fish you can eat with the viscera, with the guts, right? Sardines and things like that. But most fish, no, you don't want to. And if you can't boil them right, you got to broil them. Yeah, there are lots of issues with that. Anyway, it's not a cooking class, but ancient. Well, just these things in the ancient world, right? Everybody in the ancient world knows this, right?
Yeah.
But what I want to do is remind you of it because, unfortunately, I think a lot about this kind of stuff. But whatever.
I saw a thread on Twitter last night, and I thought of you because it was this whole thing. Like, people don't realize how poor and starving everybody was in all human history. What was going on about that, and how many women, were always on the edge of ruin and possible prostitution because of, if they didn't have good marriage prospects or something, and how important that was. Anyway, it was all like you were always saying,
Yeah.
ancient world is, we don't really have any idea or think about
Yeah, but we need to, right?
it. Yeah.
Because we may be heading there, but that's okay. Starvation cultures motivate people in amazing ways. I like to motivate a lot of our welfare people to actually get jobs because there are a lot of people that need to get back to work. Anyway, a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. Okay, that's pretty basic. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. Okay. What does that say in the Greek? this is very interesting in the Greek. And our translators did us no favors. They both are also thalassa. Ene mue, of a wind. The spirits are gods of the four winds. Not just any wind. What word did they use for wind before? Pneuma. Remember? Pneuma. He was animo, which is not just a pneuma. It's the spirits of the gods of the four winds. So this is a very specific word. So when our translator uses a great wind, okay, maybe it's a great wind, but it's more than a great wind. It's the spirits of the gods. It's the four winds. Megalu, great, lords are great. Pinotos, of breathed hard. It waked fully. It waked fully. Okay. Remember, I told you, the Greeks are not euphemistic. The Hebrews are euphemistic. This ain't euphemism here. This is concrete. This is what it says. Both the sea of great wind, the sea of great wind, the spirits or gods of the four winds, of breathed hard, waked fully. In other words, what happened?
There was low pressure directly over.
Yeah.
To be specific.
That's what we'd say, right? The Greeks are saying here, the author is saying here, that the sea awoke, that the winds awoke. Who? What winds? The gods. The gods of the sea, the gods of the air woke up, and they're making a fit. They're having a fit. They're making everything go. So this is not the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. No, this is concrete. The gods woke up. The gods woke up. Why did the gods wake up? What just happened? I told you. Do the gods feed people or the people feed gods? You just had a god feed the people. And so the gods woke up. This is to them direct correlation. This isn't an accident. The gods woke up. I got a note down here. Because you can tell, I know, we make it into this kill thing, but this is not about physical phenomena. This is the minds of the writer and the audience, the work of the sea, a god, and the winds, also the god or gods. The writer tells you this through the direct language about breathe and wait fully. We see these as euphemisms, but they are not euphemisms. This is concrete in the Greek. If you also notice, the words are not the same as used in the wind in chapter 3 when Jesus is speaking with Nicodemus. The word pneumatos or pinotos is close, but it's a type of gerund that uses the genitive case, the possessive case, for the amenu and is not a result of it. In English, we would leave this off. You don't need to tell us the wind is blowing. Wind always blows, but it doesn't breathe hard. You see this? This is really a big deal because the Greek writing means this is concrete. What's happening? The gods are breathing hard. That's what's causing all this ruckus, all this wind. And by the way, I thought it was really funny. The King James and also NIV both give us the impression that the sea was raging because of the wind. No, that is not what people believed in those days. Remember, we're talking about a society where pagan animism. These people are animists, okay? They're not just recently paganists, but there's a huge overlap in their society, even now. And so they believe it's not fire. Fire is not caused by oxygen, fuel, and combustion, okay? Heat, right? That's not what causes fire. What causes fire? Yeah, a spirit, a god, causes the fire, right? So what causes the sea to rise up? Poseidon, the god of the sea. Exactly. The god of whatever that sea is. You know, it's very important to note this, because if you don't note this, and you're missing the whole point of this exercise, because the author is telling us something very important about Jesus and the disciples. Okay? When they rode about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. All right, let's see what this says in the Greek. So when they rode about 5 or 20 or 30, about 5 and 20 or 30 furlongs, they see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh to the ship, and they were afraid. They having pushed rowed, according to the certain which how stadia, a score 25, or trikonta, 30, decade of 3. They having looked closely, the Jesus treading all around on or against of the thalassus of the sea, and Aegeus near of the Pleon, the sailor, Pleo, coming or going, and they were frightened. Ephobethan. Phobia. Ephobethan. Accordingly, when they were having pushed, rowed a score 25 or a decade of 30 stadia, they having looked closely at Jesus treading all around on the sea, and near to the sailor coming, and they were frightened. Yes, sir.
Probably they were feeling a little guilty about leaving without him in the first place, not knowing where he was. And now he's coming across the top of the water out to them. They figure, oh, now we're really going to get it.
They're in real trouble.
Well, and notice, I think this is important. He wasn't, okay, I think your example is beautiful, but Jesus isn't doing this. It says he's peripatoing. He's like, next way. He's walking all around. He's not like, I mean, he may not even, he's like, oh, hey guys, hey, I just happened to notice you. Are you okay? Right? He's walking all around. It's like he's out for a walk, a Sunday walk, where they're like, I mean, it doesn't, the impression, this is an irony. This is Greek. You notice what the logos to telos here? The telos is what? They're having a hard time, right? Because the sea and the winds and everything, and here's all Jesus. Right? And they're like, we see this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They thought they were going to die, right? And here's Jesus kind of wandering her through. But yeah, they're feeling guilty. They're not happy in this. Who's that? What? Is that Jesus? Oh, hide the boat, right? Turning all around the sea. Now, I got some information here because I thought you'd be interested. A stadia. I just want to mention this to you. I got a mathematics paper. There's more than a mathematics paper. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but Aristophanes did a measurement of the earth. The Greeks knew the earth was round, even before we even thought it was round. But anyway, and they actually figured out the circumference of the earth. And the guy who did it first was Aristophanes, way back when. I don't know if they give you the time. But the stadia, according to Herodotus, is 600 Greek feet, like a Greek feet. And the reality is you have a problem with figuring out how long a stadia is. Now, I just wanted you to know this because this is, maybe this is a rabbit hole, but this is interesting. There's the Attic, they call the Attic stadia. That's from Athens. The Attic stadia is 176.4 meters. Okay, that's 600 Greek feet. You see the modern equivalent, they said foot length, 0.2941, that's approximate. There's the Olympic Attic measure, and then there's the Italian attic measure, which is 184.8 meters. I don't know if the Romans had longer feet. There's the Doric, the Babylonian Porcian, which is 196.1 meters. And then there's the Ionic, which is the Phoenician Egyptian, which is 209.2. You say, well, who cares? Okay, the type of stadia, this is just the type of stadia, and they use it in the paper. What's interesting about this is they use it in the paper to figure out, how close this guy was to figuring out the circumference of the earth. And actually, he was pretty close. He got within at least 15%. 15% by any measure, trying to do it without actually measuring or having satellites is pretty good. Just saying, if you go home and figure it out within 15% without anything else, I'll cheer you on. You're a great mathematician. But anyway, here's the conclusion though. 25 by stadia, right? It's 25 or 30 stadia. By the lower measure, it gives you 4410 meters. And by the 30, that's 5292 meters. Or if you go by the longer measurement, the Doric measurement, then you get 552.30 or 62.76. Therefore, it's 2.74 to 3.9 miles at the greatest or least. Or by the furlongs measure, it's 21.9 to 31.2 furlongs. A furlong is an eighth of a mile. Why? I just thought it was good to have a little mathematics, right? Throw a little mathematics into it. Because didn't you wonder, what's a stadia? You read it? Well, I did. You may not even care. But to me, a stadia is pretty cool.
My translation says 3 or 4 miles, so that gives me an idea.
Look at this. Look. Huh? Pretty good, huh? And I just did with my little calculations here.
My impression is the ancient world really needed a bureau of standards.
We got one. Yeah, way too much. And the French did it, and that's why the metric system is so messed up. No aviator will ever use the metric system. Because in aviation, everything's divisible by 60. 6,000 feet in a nautical mile, 360 degrees. You can do math in your head. It's awesome. Yes, sir.
This is our present day Latin word for a venue stadium.
Yes.
This term.
That is absolutely correct. The stadium comes from stadia. And they try to measure stadias with stadiums. The furlong is a length of measure for a race course for horses. And it's an eighth of a mile, which, by the way, comes from the stadia and the stadium, too. All this is interconnected.
Kind of ironic that we still, to this day, when they are talking about the size of a ship, they're always comparing it to the size of a football field or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah. Which, let's see, 300 yards. 100 yards. Well, 100 yards, 300 feet, right? So that's half a stadia. Oh!
Unless you're in Canadian football.
Yes,
There you go. Now, what I want you to know is I'm going to tell you something you probably never ever heard before because nobody ever mentioned it, and I wish they did because we need to tell everybody this. In the ancient world, there are only 2 known myths about people who claim to walk on water. Okay, one of them was not a person, it was a god. Orion is in the myth. Orion was, he walked on water. There was also another myth, and I believe it was also Orion. Anyway, there was a monster that was granted the ability to walk on water in the myths. And Poseidon, okay, anyway, I'll get to that point. The other one is that a Buddhist monk supposedly claimed to have walked on water. The only problem is neither were observed, okay? So what you need to tell all your kids, and you need to tell every kid you know, that the account about Jesus was observed by multiple people, at least 12, right? There may have been more people on the boat, on the sailor, but the disciples all saw it. It was reported by 4 sources in history, maybe more, okay, if we start digging, that Jesus did it and he was seen doing it. Orion? Nobody saw the gods do anything, right?
Nope.
And the Buddhist monk, who never was observed, that claimed to have walked on water, And that's even a question because he came back and he said he did. He achieved, we don't even know if he achieved nirvana or not, but that's all another question. But I just wanted you to know this because what do you hear all the time from the professors and professorettes in the universities? You hear?
He was walking on the sandbar.
Well, I haven't heard that one.
That's what they say.
That's
that,
what they
that,
say.
that it was like a
Is that right?
You know,
Yeah,
that
he
was
was
under
supportive,
the water. Yeah.
Yeah, you can make these things all you want, right? He's walking on a sandbar during a storm. That's cool. They always, well, usually what they say is this. They don't even go that far. They don't even get, a lot of professors and professorettes want to say quite totally incorrectly by history that Jesus didn't exist, which is insane. That's if someone says that, they're like basically saying, I'm insane. Caesar never existed. Lincoln never existed. Washington never existed. If I can't see a picture of it or a video of it, it never happened, right? They're basically, that's insanity. That's insanity. But usually they'll say, you'll even hear this from, this is Tübingen School stuff. Well, there's lots of myths of people that walked on water. No, they're not. There are not lots of myths of people. You'll hear the thing. There's lots of myths of people that were born of a virgin. Only after Jesus. There are lots of myths of people, gods who died for mankind. No, Pan died, but not for mankind. How Pan died, nobody's sure. They think he died after an orgy of drinking and died of alcohol poisoning. But they have no idea because he was a god and no one saw him. He just died. But Pan supposedly died. It's in one of the Greek mythic poems. But Pan, other than Osiris isn't really dead. He's waiting for his lost part. But, they always want to say that all these gods, all these myth cycles had gods that resurrected. There were no gods who resurrected until Jesus Christ. They want to talk about the Mithrin. Mithras also had issues. He was castrated. But, they never tell you this. Number one, they expurgate all the stories for the kids, right? I tell you the Mithrin story, I'm not going to tell you he was castrated. Matter of fact, I tell you the Daniel story, I don't tell you he's castrated. Daniel and, the three guys in the fiery furnace, they were all castrated. It's just, we don't tell children that. For goodness sakes, we expurgate that kind of stuff, right? We don't tell the truth, and yet the truth is there because we're afraid of something. But yet then that opens the door for for example, how many kids know the Osiris myth? Every Egyptian kid knew the Osiris myth, right? No American kid knows that, I don't think, very few. And yet they'll make the claim that Osiris was a resurrection story. Osiris is still dead. He's missing his part. I'm like, this is like crazy head stuff. But yet the professors and professorettes will stand in front of a class and tell you this flat out. Where's your proof? Where's your story? Where's your information? No, I don't need proof. I just tell you. Who was that reported that one of their teachers, a professorette at some university, never taught an ounce of history or whatever in the class, just talked about politics the whole time and expected them to read the textbook and that was it?
I wouldn't doubt it.
Talk about a worthless, how much you pay them per credit hour for that, and they're not teaching.
Yeah, it's probably a $70,000 a year school too.
Anyway, I think this is really interesting because, like I said, if you go back and look, go ahead and do a Google search, do all the searches you want, go to the Smithsonian, go to the Congressional Library, and you'll find there's only the Greek god, there's the Greek monster. I should probably put that back in a Buddhist book. None of them are observed. By the way, Greek gods don't walk. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Because they use the Uranus. They fly or they just appear. They have no need to walk, and especially walk on water. Because who controls water?
Poseidon.
Poseidon is a god. The gods don't go to hell. Why? Hades plays, right? Hades controls it. why does Zeus let the gods go to Olympia? Because he's the head guy. And by the way, who is the oldest? Who is the Titan still alive? The Titan that's still alive, according to Greek myth. Hestia. Hestia. Matter of fact, Zeus was born of Kronos, right? Hestia is the only Titan left. And Hestia is the goddess of the hearth. Anyway, deep stuff into this. Everybody knows this, right, in this culture, because they know there's, Orion walked in the water, but guess what? The water is like going, the winds are going, so guess what? Can the gods even get there? No, because they fly through the Uranus. That's why Jesus makes all these comments about birds all the time. The birds, right? They're like the gods. And the birds are the messengers between the gods, by the way, and the world. So there's huge things in here. We're going to get more into it. I'm going to mention this last part here, and then we'll go on next week. But Hebrew has no equivalent idea of people walking on water. This wasn't for Hebrews, except that it's a sign. The other ancient world, it shows Jesus' power over the gods of the air and the water, basically all the gods. And I'll show you this picture. I know we're out of time. Oh, because this is a great picture. They were 2.5 to 3 miles. They're halfway across.
They're in the middle,
Yeah.
the deepest part of the.
Yeah.
No sandbars.
There ain't-
No sandbars, no.
There ain't no sandbars. Yeah, there ain't no sandbars. Just saying. Thank you, Father, for your word to pray. You look at this week. In your name we pray. And there's more to the story.
And even if there's a sandbar out there, how did he get to the
Take a
sandbar?
half